Today is August 25th, 2016. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview at Rocky Crawford in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in Dallas, Texas, November 1947. I was actually born on, back then, it was Armistice Day, the 11th of November.
11th.
Now it's Veterans Day.
Yeah. Who is your father?
My father is Hugh, H-U-G-H, Lindley, L-I-N-D-L-E-Y, Crawford.
And your mother?
Her name was Frances Rebecca Cates Roberts Crawford. She'd been married before.
Okay.
To a man named Roberts.
So Cates was a maiden name.
Cates was her maiden name.
Okay.
Maiden name, yes.
Okay. Did you go through school in Dallas?
No, I did not. We moved as a family. Moved to West Texas.
Hold on. Okay,
1947. My
Okay, I'm sorry.
my mother and dad actually met at North American Aviation in Fort Worth,
Okay.
working on aircraft. My mother worked on B-24s. Conversations I've had with her, she worked in installing turrets on B-24s during the war, and my dad was some type of inspector, and they met there and got married in 1946, and then had me in 1947. When I was about 18 months old, they moved to Midland, Texas, out in West Texas. My dad was a general contractor building homes, and there was a lot of influx of people coming back from the war, and so he moved out there to build homes, and that's what he did, most of his life. All the time I knew him. He died when I was 14 years old, but he was a general contractor building homes in the Midland, Odessa area.
Did you go to school in Midland?
Midland High School, Bulldogs, go Bulldogs.
Now, where did you start school? What elementary school?
Elementary school, my first elementary school was Davy Crockett Elementary in Midland. And during that year, they built a new school. That school was about 2 miles away. And they built a new school about, maybe 150 yards away from our front door that I went 2nd through 6th grade. And that was Ben Milam Elementary. But my first school was Davy Crockett in 1st grade.
What year did you graduate from high school?
1966.
1966. In your schooling, who's your favorite teacher?
Had to be, it was two ties. In the 4th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Duncan. She really made it come to life. I really enjoyed her. And then when I was in the 10th grade, I had an American history teacher named Mrs. Montgomery. And she turned me on to history, all kinds of history. I really enjoy history. I don't know as much as I should, but I really enjoyed history, and she is the reason I like history, because I really enjoyed her classes and the way she taught it, the way she put it together and got students involved.
You played sports in school?
Played football. I tried to play basketball my freshman year, and about it wasn't before the first game, maybe after the first or second game, coaches came to me along with a couple of other guys and said, "We're putting together a football off-season class. Would you like to join it?" Well, I got the hint, and I did that. So I played football all throughout high school, junior high and high school, and then a portion of the year of basketball when I was in the 9th grade.
Have a good team?
What, the basketball team or the football team?
Both.
It was good. It was kind of interesting because in the 7th and 8th grade, we had a pretty good team. In the 9th grade, in Midland, there were 3 other 9th grade teams in the city, and then ours, the 4. And then we played other schools, 9th grade teams from Odessa. Lost every one of those games we played against Odessa schools. But we won the city championship for the 9th grade because we beat the other 3 Midland teams. So it was kind of iffy, but we won the city championship. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was the mascot of the school?
Oh, well, when I was back then, they had 7th and 8th and 9th in one school, and that was Stephen F. Austin Junior High School, and we were the Rangers. Rangers? No, we weren't the Rangers. What were we? Stephen, oh man. And I went to high school, it was the Midland High Bulldogs.
Bulldogs.
Right.
Okay.
Midland High Bulldogs, and there was one other high school, the Midland Lee Rebels. But the Midland Bulldogs, the first time Midland Lee football team ever beat Midland High football team was the year after I graduated. So while I was there, they didn't beat us.
What did you do for recreation in high school?
Oh, several things. We had had good time with different things. We had, when I was growing up, right behind my dad was building houses. There was a lot of space. We'd go out there and just adventure, lots of mesquite and stuff like that. But then we got to doing things, just different things. Playing games, playing baseball. During the summer we played a lot of baseball. During the winter, not much going on. Get out, when it did snow, get out and play in the snow. It didn't snow very often out there. And but one of the things that we enjoyed doing, I remember my senior year, one of my good friends had family members who were coming from the west someplace to visit, and went through Monahans, Texas. Monahans is the home of Monahans State, Sandhill State Park. And they were talking about, their friends said that what they did is got a couple of boards and would basically surf on the sand dunes. So a bunch of us got some 1x8s and beveled them and then waxed them, sanded them down real good, and we went sand surfing. So we did that senior year several times senior year. And then we had a tendency to do things. We went out one time, and it had been icy, really icy. We were on a dirt road, and one guy had a sled, and another guy had a ski rope. So we went out there, and we were pulling each other behind the car, and on this sled with a ski rope, which was amazing that nobody got hurt.
Did you help your father in his building business?
Oh, I did. In fact, my first actual paying job, I can't remember how old I was, but I wasn't very old. And, of course, I found out later he paid me out of his pocket. But I helped some of the guys, some of the men that worked for him, dig a foundation for a home he was building. And, actually doing some of the digging and stuff like that. Later on, actually, it was after my dad had passed away, but I worked for another man who was the father of one of the people in my class. I worked for him one summer, building a barn and stables. He was a builder also, and so I did that. But the only time I ever worked directly for my dad like that in his business was in that 1 year digging, and that was in 1962, just not very long before he died.
Yeah. Okay. What about the weather around Midland, Odessa? The dust storms?
Dust storms, dry, and the humidity really low. I always liked that. It was always dry. When it rained, it didn't rain very often, but when it did, a lot of times it would rain a lot in just a short period of time. I remember one time being with my mother and my brother and a couple of other kids, and we got the car got drowned out, had to stop. But most of the time it was really dry, and I always enjoyed that. We had family that lived in the Dallas area, and we'd go visit them. The humidity, it would really grab a hold of me. A few years later, I lived in Houston, and the humidity, I never got used to the humidity.
Yeah.
We moved from Houston to the Dallas area, and that, I thought, the humidity in Dallas was pretty bad, but that was pretty good because getting out of that Houston humidity.
Now, how bad were the dust storms?
Dust storms could have been pretty bad. We had some pretty bad ones. It would get really dark. You could see it coming. You could see all the dust coming, and it'd get really dark, and you just go inside and you listen to the dust banging against things and everything, and the dust was so fine, it would seep in every place. I remember we had wooden windows and up and down. You lift them up and down. And I remember after a dust storm one time, looking on the inside of these windows. These are windows my dad had built. We lived in a house that he built. And on the inside, the windowsill on the inside had little sand drifts in it because it had come through around the glass. Even though the glass was set in there pretty good, it was just so fine. And it would really mess cars up, mess the paint job up on cars. I've noticed a lot of times cars after a dust storm, if they were left out or if they got in some particular place where the wind was pretty bad at the same time, it would do a pretty nasty job on the paint jobs of automobiles.
What about tornadoes? Have many tornadoes around there?
I grew up, tornadoes. I always thought about Tornado Alley. You always hearing about Oklahoma tornadoes and West Texas. I remember one time my mother and aunt, I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Midland also, my mother and aunt and my little brother, and I don't know, maybe some cousins, my aunt and uncle's children, had gone to Dallas to visit my aunt and my mother's mother, my grandmother. And I stayed with my dad, and my uncle came over and stayed with us while they were gone in our house. And early in the day, they had tornado warnings and everything. And I remember going out in the middle of the street and looking down the street, and I don't know how far out it was, but you could see a tornado. It was way out. I mean, it was way out there. And tornado warnings. Lots of people were, getting up and moving out and everything. And then a couple hours later, we were still in the watch. We were still at the house. And the house that I lived in didn't have a garage. It had a carport. You had the front door, and you could see out beyond the carport, through the carport and out into the yard. And I was standing out there even thinking about this, and I don't remember how old I was. I was probably maybe 8, 9, 10, and looked out there, and beyond, out in the yard, beyond the carport was my dad. And he saw me in the deal and said, "Hey, Rocky, come here." So I go in there, and he said, "Look up." Looked up, and that tornado was directly over our house. But it was off the ground. Lots of stuff floating around, but it was off the ground. We were looking directly up into it. And he called my uncle out, and he said, we might ought to go down the road. So we jumped in the car and went down the road. Lots of other traffic on the highway that was pretty close to our house. But I'll never forget going out there and looking up into a tornado.
What does it look like inside a tornado?
It's just big mess, like things are dark but swirling. You see a lot of times, the swirling, the deal, but it's just swirling. I don't know how far up it was. Over the years, I've thought about it, and it had to be a lot further than I thought at the time. But everything was just swirling around. So it was just like it was just sitting there.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it went over and it didn't sit down any place until it got outside. I've got my older son, one time when he was in junior high school, had a tornado at his school, and they had them all locked down, had them into safety areas and everything like that. And to this day, they have a tornado warning. He starts buckling down. Because that particular tornado actually went over their school, did not sit down. Even in the area, it was way out of town before it sat down, even if it ever did. But it went over their school, and it impressed him greatly.
I'd like to ask, did Buddy Holly come to Midland?
If he did, I wasn't aware of it. He may have come to Midland sometimes, but he died in 1959,
Yes.
if I remember correctly, and I probably wasn't all that into music, at my age at the time. I was 12 years old when actually I didn't turn 12 until later that year when he died, and so if he did, it was, if I never heard about it, I wasn't interested in it.
Where were you when President Kennedy was assassinated?
I was in school. I remember it well. We had that particular day, that particular Friday, that afternoon. It was a Friday in November, so there was a football game that night, and I was in what they called homeroom. It was a place where you could study, if you wanted to. It wasn't a particular class. I was in this homeroom, and they came on they made an announcement that the president had been shot in Dallas. And they actually piped in the news, the radio program that was talking about it. And we sat for that whole, about an hour, sat there listening to it. Everybody in the school, they piped it into everybody. And I went to another class right after that, same thing. And then we had a pep rally for the ball game that night. And it was very, very, very low key, not a lot of jumping and yelling and stuff like that. Lots of speculation on whether we would play or not. But they made the decision to go ahead and play the game. So went that night, went to the game. They had a special prayer. And back then, they prayed before every game. They had a special prayer, for the Kennedy family and, for the nation, as I remember it. And then we didn't have school on Monday, the following Monday, because of the funeral procession that they had. So we did not go to school that Monday. But I remember it because we listened to it, and teachers would talk a little bit about it, talked a little bit about him, about what it was happening. We're here, and the way the schools were arranged, it was the 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, and listening to this and thinking about, the fact that, our president had been shot and killed. And it was kind of numbing, I believe, to everybody I talked to. We talked about it in really quiet tones, no loud talking or anything like that, because it was something that we were not used to, this type of thing. Of course, we had stories about other things going on in the world, but this was the president of the United States.
What did you do after high school?
Well, after high school, I actually, the summer before my senior year, I had a cousin and her family who lived in Lafayette, Louisiana, and they asked me to come out there that summer and maybe find a job, something like that. It was just my mother, my brother, and I, so I think they were trying to help my mother out, get me out of her hair. So I went out there that summer and then came back to go to my senior year in high school with plans of attending college when I got out of high school. In fact, I'd already been accepted to Texas Tech University, and a good friend and I had already put a deposit down on an apartment. And but then I went back after the summer after I graduated. I went back to Louisiana to work. I had found a job there the summer before, and I went back to working that same job. And I did, and I realized this was more helpful to my mother, and that she didn't need to, because I still had a younger brother at home, she didn't need to worry about paying for college and things like that. So I stayed in Louisiana to work with the thoughts, the plans of going to school in Louisiana. Now, because of out-of-state tuition, I thought problem, but I actually went down and talked to, I can't remember if it was the dean, it was some official at the University of Southwestern Louisiana, which is, or was at Lafayette. It is now University of Louisiana Lafayette. Mm-hmm. And actually got the out-of-state tuition waived for me because of my situation. And I was planning on going to school there. But then, but I didn't start in the September of '66. I didn't start school. And then my cousins and I moved to Houston that December. Moved to Houston. My cousin's husband lost his job, found another one in Houston, so we moved to Houston. And I applied to the University of Houston. And it was kind of interesting because the day I went to register for the summer, what semester? The summer semester, not the summer semester, but the spring semester. I'm sorry, the spring semester. The day I went to register, I'd been accepted and everything. I went to register for classes. You know, I knew I had to take 12 hours, at least 12 hours to avoid the draft. I received that evening in the mail, I received my pre-draft notice that said, you know, in 30 days I'm gonna have to take a physical, my pre-draft physical. But I had registered for school, so went through the process and let them know, and I got my deferment, my student deferment for that, for school, for college. So I went to the University of Houston, didn't go the following summer. Actually, I got married the following summer. And then the following fall I went back to the University of Houston. But that, you know, that's what I was doing when I got out of high school. My future wife was a student at North Texas State University, which is now the University of North Texas in Denton. And she came down to visit one time, and I remember it perfectly. You know, we'd talked about, you know, possibly getting married or something. And back then, my cousin's husband, I always referred to him as my cousin, always gave me haircuts. And she came down to visit, and she slept in a separate bedroom than I did. And my cousin always gave me haircuts, and that day on Saturday, we were going to do something. And so, you know, in the middle of the den, my cousin's giving me a haircut. You know, got a little thing wrapped around me. And my girlfriend walks out, and she's looking at it. She said, "Have you thought about the possibility of us getting married this summer?" And I hadn't, but she had. And it just kind of, like a snowball, it went from there, and we got married summer of '67, in July of '67. And so that, you know, lot, and came back, after we got married, came back, found a place to live, a couple of places. We found one place to live, and we were there for 2 weeks, and just before we moved out, somebody had driven by and shot somebody in one of the apartment buildings. There were homes that were made into apartments, and shot them. So we found us another apartment pretty quick, and moved to that. And then I was going to school, working full time.
Yeah.
And she got her a job. She was working and working full time and going to school.
So did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted. That was 1967. We got married. I did not know. I found out this much later, but I did not know. I knew that you had to take at least 12 hours a semester to keep your deferment.
Yes.
You also had to, I did not know this, had to complete 30 hours in a calendar year. I did not know that. And I went 12 hours semester, didn't go to summer, went 12 hours. Same thing in '68.
Yeah.
And then in that fall semester of '68, my draft status changed from whatever it was for students, I can't remember, to 1A. You know, and that's when I checked into it and found out that you had to complete 30 hours in a calendar year. You know, 12 hours a semester, you know, but you had to complete 30 hours a calendar year. And the Christmas holidays of '68, the cousins that had lived there in Houston, that I'd lived with in Lafayette and back to Houston, they had moved to Austin, and we went to visit them during Christmas holidays. Came back, went to work on January the 2nd. We worked in downtown Houston, both of us. We both worked for the Humble Oil and Refining Company. And came home that evening. We lived in an upstairs apartment, and we got out of the car. My wife went up to the apartment. I always went, picked up the mail. So I picked it up, and I was coming back, and I opened this mail, the Selective Service mail, opened it up, greetings from the President. January the 2nd, 1969, I got my draft notice. and went in, I think it was like the 29th or 30th is when I actually had to be back in Midland and go and, you know, inducted, or had my physical. They had a bunch of us that early in the morning. They drove us to Abilene for the physicals, for a physical. And then we hopped on a plane, Trans-Texas Airways, and flew to El Paso, Fort Bliss for basic training.
Right. Basic Fort Bliss. The Logan Heights.
Logan Heights, yeah, I remember Logan Heights.
Tell me about basic.
Well, you know, basically, it was kind of interesting because, being, not, okay, what are we doing here, you know, basic training. And it was kind of interesting in that they taught you all how to do, we got there and there were still guys coming in. We went in and, you know, overnight we were in a barracks someplace. There were a bunch of us that had come from Abilene. And then they moved us to the basic training units in barracks. But not everybody was in yet, that was part of this basic training class, if you will. And so we were just kind of, you know, doing around, you know, they had a couple of drill sergeants and they weren't being drill sergeants. You know, they wore their campaign hats, but they weren't being what we found out later, what drill sergeants are like. You know, pretty nice. And there was one guy, I remember one guy there, I can't remember his name, but he had been a member of the previous basic training unit, but had not been assigned yet. And so they were using him to help all the new guys get used to things and teaching us how to do everything and talking to us about everything and getting us set up in the barracks because they still had guys coming in. I remember sitting down one time talking to him. He was talking to us. There were several of us talking to him, and he said something about the drill sergeants and everything. He said, and one thing you got to remember about them is they all have the same first name. And I remember going through my head, I remember just like it was yesterday, thinking, well, that's kind of unusual. They've all got the same first name. And the guy said, yeah, drill sergeant. So you always address them as drill sergeant this, Pratt. I remember drill sergeant Pratt, big guy, you know, but I remember that. And then we got, you know, started doing things and going through the process of basic training and a lot of running. You know, they taught us how to march. You get on march, and then one time we're marching, and he says, and all of a sudden, you know, he's outside as one of the drill sergeants. He said, you know, double time with time. You know, just drew it out. Oh, and so then we started running, and we ran a lot. You know, and it wasn't too bad because we were, you know, we were dressed in fatigues. And back then, you know, the fatigues we were dressed in were the green fatigues, and put your shirt tail in. You always had your shirt tail in. You know, I learned really quick that, you know, if you're outside, you have a hat on. If you're not outside, you do not have a hat on. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You know, you always. And of course, you go through the process of getting your hair cut. You know, you sit down, and I had, you know, it was a little bit longer hair. I don't have any hair now, but a little bit, it wasn't long hair, but it was combed. Yeah. And I didn't have it in a flat top or what we call a burr haircut or anything like that. But sitting down and watching the guys get their haircut, you know, I mean, the barbers zoom, 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 you know. And I got in there, zoom, 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 and that was it, you know. I always, when, you know, later in my 20s, when I started noticing I was losing my hair. And the biggest thing I blamed at that time was the fact that the Army cut off all my hair and then made me wear a hat, you know, all the time, or most of the time when I was outside. And that, you know, helped me lose all my hair. Then again, I've done some research, and, you know, there's more to it than that. But
what type of training did you have in basic?
Well, basic training covered a lot of things. You know, we had to learn about the Army, learn about the military, but then they taught us marching. They taught us how to handle a rifle. We used M14s. Taught us how to handle a rifle, how to, you know, those of us, and I had done some shooting. I wasn't a hunter, but I had done some shooting before, and taught us how to shoot, and, you know, to be careful and all that kind of stuff. How to carry ourselves, how to react and act to other Army members, you know, and, you know, how hand-to-hand combat, you know, how to fight with a bayonet. It was pretty generalized. In talking to people since then, you know, it's changed up a whole lot, I think. But pretty generalized, covering every aspect of military. But a lot of it, we were out and out. Bivouac, we had the bivouac, and I remember one time we were pulling guard duty, and this guy he was the older, relatively speaking, older man, and he was a lieutenant. And when I say relatively older, he may have been 30. He was a lieutenant, but I found out later that he had been enlisted for a good while before getting a commission and became a lieutenant. So he was the second in command for our company, our basic training company. And he was teaching people how to handle weapons, especially for inspections. And I remember vividly. There were several of us set for guard duty, and he was going by and he had explained to us, okay, now if somebody's going to inspect your weapon, they reach out for your weapon, you let go of it.
Yeah.
They take you they don't have to tug it from you. You let go of it. So he went around, he was doing it, and sure enough, he didn't take everybody's weapon, but he took mine. And I did. I let go of it. He did that and gave it back to me and everything. And he asked me some questions. They didn't ask. I don't remember the questions, but he seemed to pay a little more attention to me, which scared me. What's going on? And then he goes back out and everything, and he says, "Okay, here we go. This is your guard positions. Da 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 da. And Crawford, your supernumerary." I thought, "Oh no, what in the world is supernumerary?" And a little bit later, one of the drill sergeants explained to me and I can't remember the true definition of the word, but what they used it for is that you were an extra. I didn't get assigned to a specific guard position that night. I was in the guardhouse office, if you will, with the drill sergeants, with whoever was in charge, and if they needed me, they would use me.
Yeah.
But otherwise, and I helped, do whatever they needed to do inside there, and found out that that's a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. I didn't do something bad, but for some reason, that lieutenant, and one of the things too, and he mentioned this later on to me, is because whenever I answered questions, I answered it just almost as loud as I could. Instead of saying yes sir, no sir, yes sir, no sir. I was playing the game, and that was the reason for that. So
Forced marches.
Forced marches. Well, forced marches were kind of interesting because you never knew how long you were going to go, and you never knew, because you were typically weekend go on the forced march, and you're carrying your weapon on your shoulder, and then he would every so often they would say, okay, order arms, and we knew what that meant, that we were going to run a while.
Yes.
Order arms. But we went a couple 5-mile marches. That's what we estimated it to be, and that's what drill sergeants told us later on. About 5 miles. And this is in West Texas, and sand. Out. Actually, we were out in. It wasn't so much West Texas. It was what was the name of the McGregor Range. I'd never heard of McGregor Range until then. And in fact, at one time, I don't know if it still is or not. The largest range. At that time, what they were saying, the largest range in the free world, largest firing range in the free world. Because not only did you fire rifles, they fired rockets, things there. But we'd go out there. We'd be at McGregor Range, and going through everything, and then marching. We'd march, around, march up and down the roads, up and down the non-roads, like that. And every once in a while, we'd go double time, and we'd do that. And it was kind of interesting because I kept thinking, okay, what if you start lagging behind? It's a couple of guys, kind of lag behind, and drill sergeants would, get in their ear and everything. They never did anything, at least I never noticed, that physically detrimental, other than making us do all of that. But they would, as I recall it, now you got to remember, this has been many years ago. They would get verbally personal, in telling us, what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing, or how we're doing it and not doing it right and everything like that. but it was a learning experience, you know. And I, fortunately, you know, I was able to, for the most part, keep up, you know. In all of that, and you know, learning how to use a weapon, learning how to take an M14 apart and put it back together, learning how to fire it, learning how to, you know, take care of it, and then learning how, you know, the proper way on range and to do things, and then, you know, going through drills where you know, the live fire drill, you know, you're crawling, you know, doing low crawl and across everything and around bunkers and everything, and they're firing live ammunition. You know, we get all through that, and somebody asks us, okay, just how far above our heads were they firing? And one of the drill sergeants, well, you know, a 6-foot man could walk through it. You know, it wasn't like, and I was figuring, you know, I was thinking, trying to think logically that, yeah, they're not going to get anywhere near close to us, you know, if they can help it, even if somebody goes nuts and panics and gets up and runs away. But it was interesting, you know. And then I remember going through an exercise one night, and it was sand dunes, kind of hilly area, and we're running up and down, and the exercise was, okay, flare goes off, you know, you drop and be still until the light goes out. Well, we're running up hills, you know. For some reason, we just never got to the downside. Running up these hills, and flare would go off, and everybody hit the ground, you know, and just be quiet and watching until it died out, and then get up and keep on going. You know, lots of stuff like that, you know, as I remember it. You know, lots of, you know, stuff we, you know, of course we take different types of classes, you know, that we went to, you know, learning mostly military stuff and how to take care of equipment, that type of thing, you know, take care of some type of equipment. I don't remember all the exacts and all the deal. Like I said, it's been a long time ago. But it was an interesting experience, you know, as I look back on it. Probably, if you'd asked me, you know, about it at that time, I would have not been very, you know, I would have been, man, this is the worst thing I've ever gone through. But it really wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
You know, we got to carry, you know, on some of the marches, obviously carry packs full of stuff, and carrying a weapon, and it was kind of interesting. And every once in a while, you know, somebody would really, really tick off one of the drill sergeants, and we're marching in this direction. So he makes somebody with their rifle and with their pack and everything run around the platoon. The platoon, you know, marching in platoon or in platoons, and run around the platoon while the platoon is moving forward. Okay. Note to self: don't tick off the drill sergeant, because that'll happen. We had the commanding officer too, our company commanding officer. I'll never forget this. One of the things I had taken with me, I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Everything was a chess set. You know, it was in my foot locker. Foot locker's really neat and everything. You know, bouncing quarters off the beds and all that kind of stuff. But he came through with inspection one time. Everybody's locker was up near you. He was looking at mine and said, "Oh, you play chess?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do." I had learned that you don't call drill sergeants sir, you know, that you do call officers sir. And he said, "Are you very good?" And I said, "I don't know, you know, I enjoy playing. You know, I had an older sister who taught me many years ago." He said, he looked at me, he said, "You know, one time I sat down and I played 2 guys at the same time and beat both of them." And he just went on with his inspection. Well, the guys in my little cube area, you know, they weren't cubicles so much as they were divided by lockers. We had a 3-person, you know, 2 bunks this way, 1 bunk against the wall, and then lockers and the same thing. But those 2 guys really got a kick out of the fact that with the lieutenant, and he was a lieutenant, you know, he was a first lieutenant, you know, bragging about his being able to play chess really well. You know, oh, okay, whatever. But that was, and really just when, in those type of things, when we saw the lieutenant, the commander, the second in command, the other guy I was telling you about, the older gentleman who was a lieutenant also, was more involved with us. But the company commander wasn't. You know, every once in a while we'd see him, but not as often as we saw the drill sergeants.
You ever played the commander in chess?
No, I didn't. No. And I played a couple of guys in the unit. You know, we played chess and everything because I had a little chess at me. But I never
Did
played.
you discuss Vietnam in basic?
Oh yes, oh yes. I will never forget because we had, you know, people were talking about Vietnam. We had 2 drill sergeants who had done tours in Vietnam. And we were talking about one, and this was the time I was talking about guard duty, the first time guard duty, had the drill sergeants, and I was the supernumerary, so I was in there with them. And this guy was talking about, you know, being out on a patrol and waking up or rolling over whatever, and there was either a Viet Cong or a North Vietnamese, I can't remember what he said, in their camp area. You know, what he was doing, he was clean. What the drill sergeant was doing was cleaning his weapon, 45.
Yeah.
And he said there was in their camp, and so he rolled over, grabbed his 45, and later on, when I learned more stuff, I was wondering why did he have a 45? But in this VC or North Vietnamese regular started running out of deal. He said he grabbed his 45 and just emptied it. He said it was all over the place. You know, didn't hit him at all over the place. He was talking about how difficult it was to shoot a 45. You know, talked about it like that. We had we were all in a room. We had a chaplain come see us, come talk to us, and he was talking to us about Vietnam and about what we would be going through if we went to Vietnam, and things like that. And you know, he's a chaplain, and he's a Protestant chaplain. He had mentioned, I can't remember what denomination, but he used a term that he's the only man of God I have ever heard use this term. And he was talking about in cities, in whether it be Saigon or wherever it is, the girls coming out and saying, "Gee, I want to," you know, and I'm sitting there, you know, talking about, you know, you want to have sex, you know, when you're using a different word, and the chaplain said it, and I had a hard time getting beyond that point, you know. I realized later, you know, he was being demonstrative. He was, you know, telling about how it was. But, you know, to me at the time, and I was 21 years old, this is a chaplain, and he's using that word. Okay, that's an interesting, because everybody else, of course, used the word. And I thought it was kind of interesting. But, you know, he was talking about, you know, being in Vietnam and what it would be like for us.
Yeah.
And then we had several other people who would come in and talk to us about, you know, being in Vietnam.
Have anyone in your company sneak over to Juarez?
I heard that there may have been some that had.
But it was off limits at that time.
It was off limits, yes, it
Yes.
was. It was off limits, and I can't remember how many weeks it was before we got passes, weekend passes. But my wife and my mother, my wife, when I got drafted, we moved back to Midland. My wife moved back in with her parents, but one weekend my wife and mother came out to visit, and it was the first weekend that was we were getting passes, you know. But I remember, you know, the following week, you know, hearing about guys who had gone to Juarez. Yeah, it was off limits.
How long did basic last?
8 weeks.
8 weeks. So after basic, where'd you go?
After basic, I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Huachuka, if I remember correctly. K-A or C-A. Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
What'd you do there?
Okay, they actually sent me to clerk typist school there. In the orientation before basic training, they had asked us some questions. Number one was, if you're stationed in the United States, where would you like to be stationed? I said, Texas. You know, I want to stay in Texas. If you're stationed outside the United States, where would you like to be stationed? And I actually thought to myself, okay, a little reverse psychology. I said, hey, Vietnam. You know, but they sent me to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and I was there for 4 weeks, and it was pretty hot. You know, it's in southern Arizona, not far from Nogales in the Mexican border, and that was off limits. to go there. But I went there, and it was kind of interesting because, you know, just the same thing. I had learned how to type in school, and the Army had a whole different way of typing, teaching typing, and other things, you know, talking about company, you know, running a company and things like that. And it was interesting, you know, not a whole lot going on. Had a good friend that I had met. I say good friend, I met him at basic training. You know, we were in basic training together. He had a portable battery-operated record player, and he had several albums. But one of them he had was Iron Butterflies, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida.
Yes.
Okay. Now, it was the first time I'd ever seen where there was one song on one side, 15 minutes long, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And he played it all the time. I could not stand it. But now I like it, you know, just because of that. But, you know, not a whole lot, you know, went on. You know, one weekend, we went to, there was 3 or 4 of us, got in touch with girlfriends and wives, and met them in Tucson. My wife flew in to Tucson for a weekend, and that was enjoyable. You know, being in Tucson and looking around and everything, but being with my wife. You know, as far as, you know, the military part of it, we had some guard duty. We pulled some guard duty, but you know, not much other than that. And then you know, one of the things they told us about the second, I guess maybe it was the second week we were there, is that there'd be a handful of us. I say a handful, I mean that could possibly go to finance school, Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. And I got to be one of them, along with a couple of other guys that I had gotten to know. And so it was kind of interesting because we, you know, jumped on a bus and went to Tucson, flew out of Tucson to Chicago, had changed planes in Chicago at O'Hare, and, you know, walked around O'Hare for a little bit before we got on a plane to Indianapolis. Then we went to Indianapolis for that class. It was kind of, because that was in April of '69. Let's see, yeah, April, late April. And we got there, and Indianapolis was dead. First or second night we were there, we could go off. They we could go off base. We went to downtown Indianapolis in the evening, and there was nothing. I mean, it was just shut down. There was nothing going on in Indianapolis. This was in late April. 1st of May, it was like somebody turned on a light bulb. Town came alive because of the Indianapolis 500 that was going to be run at the end of May.
Yes.
Yeah. But, you know, the best thing about Indianapolis is my wife came up. She and I rented an apartment with another couple. They were from Minnesota, and they had a child, a baby. But we shared a 2-bedroom apartment, you know, because we wanted to live off base, and we could. And so my wife came up, and she got a job, part-time job. It was temporary, you know, temps. She got sent out to different places. And we actually went to one of the time trials for the Indianapolis 500. We couldn't afford to go to the race. We could barely afford to go to time trials, you know, get a ticket for it. But went to that. And it was interesting because I learned a lot more about the Army, you know, different things, obviously pay stuff and all that kind of stuff. But I learned about different aspects of the Army, other than, you know, what basic had been all about and everything. It was a little more in depth, you know, Army, general type stuff. And met some people, you know, that were kind of interesting. People who, you know, there were a bunch of us from Texas, and so we seemed to be interesting to some of the instructors, the way we talked.
Now this is finance school?
This is a finance school at Fort Benjamin Harrison. You know, enjoyed that and enjoyed learning about military finances.
How long did that last?
I'm thinking it was I think it's set up for 8 weeks, if I remember correctly. I'm not 100% sure about that. I just know that toward the end of the school, that they were talking about, okay, you're going to start getting orders, whatever it might be. And a couple of guys came one day, they got their orders, got 15-day leave, and they would report to Oakland Army Base, and then from there they would be taken overseas, Southeast Asia someplace. But I didn't get my orders. These guys, part of it was too, is, they were getting all kinds of shots and everything. And one of the things too about the Army is the number of shots you get.
Yes.
And back then too, I don't know how they do it now. There were a couple of them that I got, walk up, somebody stick a needle into you, but they had little guns, little air guns, where they did several at a time. I remember walking through a line and a person on either side, doing it to both arms at the same time.
I still have a mark somewhere.
I had a guy that was in front of me that when one person did that, he kind of flinched, just ripped his skin, the air, just ripped his skin, because it's air. And I thought, okay, but I didn't get any orders. Everybody else was, and in fact, the guy that lived in the same apartment we did got his orders, and I was concerned about, okay, are we going to be in this apartment alone and have to pay for it? That type of thing, because I hadn't got my orders. And I would go to the base, and I wasn't doing anything. I'd go to the base, and I'd, just kind of wander around and everything, and come home, and my wife would ask me, did you get your order? One day, I went up there, and the guy said, okay, here, you need to go over to medical and get a plague shot. I said, what does this mean? And he just smiled at me. So I went over to medical, got a plague shot in the hip. This wasn't a gun, it was a needle in the hip. And come back, and then I went someplace else, and sure enough, they had my orders. 15 days leave, report to Oakland Army Base for assignment.
What did you think you got orders in Vietnam?
Well, probably a myriad of mixed emotions, because I figured it was coming. Everybody and uncle was going to Vietnam. I figured it was coming, but at the same time, once you get it, all of a sudden it's true. And so it was relief that I got in orders, but at the same time, lots of anxiety. What is this going to mean? What am I going to do? What are they going to want me to do in Vietnam? One of the things I had said all throughout basic to my family and to guys I was with, basic and everything, is I'm not sure, that even in the most dire situation, that I could actually point a rifle or weapon at an individual, at a human being, and shoot him, and pull the trigger, with intent to kill. And people kept saying, well, you get in a situation, you're going to, whatever. And I think they had a lot of, my wife was a lot of concern about that. Her concern is that if I didn't pull the trigger, then the other person might pull his trigger, We had this thing going in basic where, especially after we learned how to fight with the bayonet, hand-to-hand type thing, is that one of the things they taught you is you brace your rifle and you hold it, ha! And everybody would do like this, go, ha! And the other guy's over there, he goes, ha! And pulls his trigger, and pulls the trigger on his weapon. Why in the world would you get to the point that you run out of the ammunition? And I remember in Vietnam, is everybody would sacrifice just about anything, except for maybe food, for more space to carry ammo. You always wanted to have as much ammo as you could have. Anyway, so that afternoon, we went back to the apartment. I went back to the apartment, and everybody was in there, and I opened the door, and my wife looked at me, and I just smiled. Didn't say a word, and she just fell to pieces, because she knew immediately that, what had happened there. So we packed up and everything and drove back to Midland. And there for a week, and then, they took me, I remember, my mother and my wife took me to the airport, put me on an airplane. I was obviously it was during the summertime, and I was in khakis. Flew to Los Angeles International, to LAX, before then had to catch another plane. But it was a late flight in there, and so I was there all night long at LAX. So I just wandered around, because I found where I needed to be the next morning at whatever time in order to get on the flight up to Oakland. So I just kind of wandered around. I ran across the guy, and I hadn't done a whole lot of traveling. This guy had an overcoat on. He came up to me and said, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, want to buy a watch?" Pulled up both sleeves, watches, all of it. I'll never forget that, because I'd seen it on TV, things like that. But I mean, literally, I don't know how many watches he had on each arm. He was selling watches. I didn't buy a watch, but I got a kick out of the whole thing. Then went in, flew into Oakland the next day. I remember, because if I remember correctly, the Oakland International, or whatever the airport's name is there next to the bay, or was. I don't know where it is now. And you're flying in over water, and you got water on the side. It's kind of neat, And you get into a bus, and they take you, and they start processing, because they have to give you some more shots, and go through some processing and everything. And then it was amazing, because some guys, you still wait, you could wait days before they would ship you out. But fortunately I didn't have to. I can't remember how long was it, but it was like maybe 3 days most, before I got my orders. I can't remember I don't know why, but I can't remember the date. I can't remember that date. Arrived in Vietnam on the 17th of July, 1969. But went out to, and I again, a lot of things happening. I just really, I think about, and I share, some things I share, is went out to Travis Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. We're going out there, and we get out, that was before we had, boarded from inside the terminal. You had to go out and walk up the gate. The big 707 or DC-8, I can't remember if it was 707 or DC-8, they all look the same. But it said Trans-Caribbean Airlines on it. And I thought, Trans-Caribbean Airlines? And I did not know, actually, I think talked to one of the stewardesses. I did not know that a lot of airlines contracted the federal government to fly to Vietnam, fly people to Vietnam. Not everybody flew over there in C-130s, or on a boat. I had a good friend who didn't go to Vietnam. He went to Guam, but he went on a boat, and some guys I met went to Vietnam on a boat, so we were flying Trans-Caribbean Airlines. We flew, and it was early in the morning in California, so it was even earlier in Texas. So I didn't call my wife. Flew to Honolulu, landed at Honolulu International, and I thought it was kind of interesting. We went in there, and we actually got off the plane, but they kept us all in kind of one little area there. But there was a phone, so I called my wife. I can't remember what time it was, but it was 7:30 in the morning in Midland, and she said, "Where are you?" I said, I'm in Hawaii. I'll see you here in several months. Talked for a few minutes, and then flew out, and next stop, if I remember correctly, it was Wake Island. It was kind of interesting too, because they told us, Wake Island, and did a bank. Now I'm sitting, you got a sea of green. We're in jungle fatigues now. Sea of green, all these guys, and I'm sitting in 3 seats, 3 across, all the way down, and I'm sitting between 2 guys that probably been in the military, for 50 years. I don't know. They were older guys, older than me anyway, but sergeants. They had at least 3 stripes, if not more. And I'm sitting between them, and I was reading a book. I was reading, what was that? The one about they made a movie about it with Alan Alda, who he was a writer. And he became a part of the Detroit Tigers. I'm sorry, not the Detroit Tigers, the Detroit Lions football team. What was it? I can't remember it. But I was reading it, I was laughing, and they kept saying, "Is that book really that funny?" Sure. Anyway, we're banking, and I can see Wake Island. It's a runway, with a little bit of fringe on it. I thought, oh yeah, over the water. And when he took off. We were there for an hour, refueling, whatever. But I'll never forget that. Looking at that, and I thought, golly, are we going to be able to land on that? And then we flew from there to Guam. And at Guam, it was kind of interesting because we were turning on a little deal. I'm looking back. I can look over the seats and everything through the window, and I see a B-52 man. Oh, that's cool, at Guam. And we're there, and then we fly into Benoit Air Base, just northeast of Saigon, and they, got us off. They put us on a bus, and we're sitting there. The bus driver's up there, and we're sitting there. And this bus has bars on the windows, And I remember one guy saying, "They've already got us in Vietnam." That may not be the exact words, but something. "They've already got us in Vietnam. Are they thinking that we're going to try to escape out of the windows?" And the driver said, "Well, actually, those bars aren't to keep things in; it's to keep things out." And you can see light bulbs going click, 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 click. And then you got to looking at it and say, "Sure enough, that would be really difficult to get a hand grenade through those bars." I'll never forget that. He said, "Keep things out, not in." And we drove, and this was the 17th of July. We drove over to the Benoit base, not Benoit. This is MACV base at what was the name of the place? Long Bend. In Long Bend over there, and they assigned us places to sleep for that night. And I'm sitting out there. What was kind of interesting too, this is always an interesting thing for me, is that we left San Francisco, Travis Air Force Base, in the morning, and we were, the length of the trip was 22 hours, and it was daylight the whole way. It was daylight. It was the sun started going down once we got into Long Bend. Just soon, right after we landed at Benoit and then bussed over to Long Bend, the sun started going down, and that always one of the things that stuck with me. It was 22-hour flight. I timed it. 22-hour flight, and it was daylight the whole way. And we got over there, and we're a bunch of us sitting around, not nothing to do, waiting to go to bed, and back over to one area, and I think it was actually east, if I remember correctly. You could hear gunfire. Not machine gun, but just every once in a while shot, and we could tell it was gunfire. Not knowing what it was or anything, but gunfire. You think, okay, we're in Vietnam. And didn't know how it had been assigned yet. The next day found out been assigned to First Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. That was a big thing. It was Air Mobile, and went to a camp there at Benoit. They had a little area where everybody was in tents, and it was a little training. Everybody coming into the First Cav went through some training, and we were in tents. And so put us in a tent. We're in tents, and they went through a couple of classes, and they were telling us what they were going to do and everything. Teach us how to rappel and other things. And then I can't remember what all we did the first day, but then the next morning, everybody's getting up, and then all of a sudden you hear an explosion, and then a siren, and they had trenches, in this camp area. They had the trenches. So everybody in the trenches, because there was a rocket attack. Now, you may be familiar with, you had Benoit Army Camp, and then right adjacent to that you had the air base, Benoit Air Base. And what happened, there was a rocket attack that morning, on the air base. Rockets were aimed at the air base. And one of them actually hit something that, made a big explosion, figured it was probably an ammo dump or something, ammo place. And, but, we're running over there and, it's in the morning. It's not as hot as I remembered it being later on, but it was warm in the morning. And I had all these trenches where everybody, to run into when they had rocket attacks or any kind of attack. And they were full, And so I just kind of stopped and I kind of walked over and stood beside something. I didn't want to get in there, because I knew that I was going to probably sweat to death if I got in there. But they were full. A lot of people running in there, right, because that rocket attack, that second morning. Well, it was the first morning after being assigned, I was in the Union, and that was interesting, because a rocket attack, and they were talking about it, that the Viet Cong would set up rockets, and the way they put it is that they would set them up so that they would fire off after they had left. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they were doing it, but there would be nobody there for anybody to go find. But the rockets, and their biggest target in the area was the air base, because a lot of military sorties flew out of that base. And that over the next 13 and a half months, I noticed that there were, a lot of flights. A lot of F-100s, a lot of A-37s flying.
How long you at Long Bend?
I was at Long Bend off and on for the whole time.
Okay. Now, what unit in the Cav were you assigned to?
I was assigned to the 15th Admin Company, which was 15th Admin, which was located there in Long Bend.
Yeah. Hold on. 15th Admin.
15th Admin Company, First Cavalry.
Were you in the brigade or battalion, brigade?
If it was, I think it was, but I can't remember exactly how it was set up. All I remember is 15th Admin.
Yeah, okay.
I had to go back and look.
Yeah.
Because they were there, even though the headquarters for the First Cav was up north from there. I'm trying to remember, because it moved while I was there.
Well, we moved from Enclave to Camp Evans.
Yeah.
And then Camp Evans down to Food Bend.
Food Bend, yeah, I remember moving to Food Bend.
I left from Food Bend.
Yeah. We weren't we weren't at the headquarters.
Okay.
But we were there.
Why were you at Long Bend?
Long Bend. Well, Long Bend's where they processed us in. We actually landed at Benoit Air Base, got on a bus, and they took us to Long Bend to process, and I think to assign to units.
But then you stayed at Long Bend?
No, I'm sorry, did I say that? Then after I got assigned to the First Cav, went to their little training unit, which was at Benoit. I'm sorry, it was at Benoit. And then that's where I stayed.
Okay.
Was at Benoit Army Base.
Now, why'd you stay at Benoit instead of Food Bend?
Because that's where they sent us for our little mini
But your first
training.
year.
Right. It was this little training area was First Cav.
Okay.
It was First Cav because one of the things they taught us how to do was rappel.
Okay.
How to rappel out of a helicopter or down the
So
south.
what was your job at Benoit? What'd you do?
I was 73 Charlie at finance.
What was your job as finance?
Well, several things, whatever they wanted to do, because at finance school they had taught us a bunch of things. What I did is because they had the 15th Admin commander was at Benoit, but then away from there, down closer to the airport, closer to the air base, and it was still in Benoit, was where we processed troops into the unit, in the country, into the First Cav. Because there was a lot of times where we had people who were coming from other units. While I was there, the First Infantry Division was sent home, and they had a lot of guys who had less than 6-9 months in country, and instead of them being sent home, with the rest of the First Division, they just transferred to other units. A bunch of them transferred to the First Cav. But they had that unit there where, that's where everybody was processed in.
Okay.
And then up, I don't know, a couple of miles away, or I'm not sure I remember, was the headquarters for the 15th Advent. And that's where the commander was and everybody else. And I went up there and interviewed with them. I say interview, they wanted to talk to me. It was kind of interesting because I went up with another guy and the other guy says, you know what? When we were being processed, somebody had told him in this unit, said, hey, what you need to do is ask them to send you back down here to the processing unit because, we don't pull guard duty and other things. And they told me the same thing, but I didn't say anything. I was just going to process. But this guy mentioned it to whoever he talked to, the same person I talked to. And I cannot remember if it was the commanding officer or next in charge or whoever it was. But what they did is they assigned me to a processing unit, and they took him at the headquarters unit to do whatever they were doing there. And that's where I stayed most of the time I was there.
So what did you do in the processing unit? What did you do?
They're basically processing troops into the unit.
Okay.
They come in, whether it was from another unit or from the world, they come in, they're processing. You had to take their name, get them everything process their pay, how they're going to get paid, how much, because they could designate how much they want, if they wanted, all of their money. Back then, of course, people in the military got paid a whole lot. Anyway, all of it, or just a portion of it, and some of it going home, buying bonds, all that type of stuff. But there was just a processing the people into the First Cav. And then they would go wherever their assignment was. They would be sent to, in that processing portion of it, they'd be sent to wherever their assignment was, wherever that unit happened to be in country.
What type of quarters do you have at Midland?
They had Quonset huts.
Quonset huts.
Mm-hmm. These Quonset huts, they weren't too bad. I had cots, regular Army military cots, and no double deckers or anything like that. So that was good. And it was just kind of interesting. I met some of these guys. They've been in, sergeants have been in the military for a long time. Our sergeant for our unit was, in fact, in the section of the Quonset hut that I was in. And he was an interesting guy. He drank himself to sleep every night. And, he'd been in the military for a long time, talked a lot about it. It was kind of interesting. And then the other guys, just like me, been in the military maybe 5 or 6 months, something like that. Some of them came in and been in a while. We had a few come in on their second tour. We had one guy who was in our unit who came in the country the first time, re-enlisted for 3 years, so he could change his MOS from infantry to something else. And then he, did a 6-month extension. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 times. Maybe, I think it was 3 times he did a 6-month extension, to serve in Vietnam. Served for two and a half years in Vietnam, so he'd get that 5-month early out, after re-enlisting. We had a bunch of guys that re-enlisted out of the field, re-enlisted, because they were getting shot at, that type of thing. But just processing guys and talking to guys. Like I said, one of the things about this unit is that they didn't pull guard duty. Well, once they started, and it was just a few months, I've been a few months, once they started pulling units out, they were running out of people to do guard duty. So we started pulling guard duty. And that got kind of interesting.
What were you guarding?
Well, the green line. Typically what we did at night, bunkers on the green line around the Army base, which basically had bunkers around the Air Force base, bunkers around the Army, or the perimeters, and they came together. Well, the perimeter of the Army base was guarded by Army personnel. Perimeter on the Air Force was Air Force personnel. But we had bunkers all the way around it, and towers. Towers, you had people in those night and day. The bunkers, they were just there in the night, at night, in the bunker, in the sandbag bunkers, which was kind of interesting. You know, one of the things I had learned is that you know, if you get into a firefight and you're carrying, or whoever is carrying a M30, typically M30, you might be something else, but typically back then, you know, M50s, you didn't have so much of those with people carrying them as if they were on some type of machinery. But M30s, you had guys carrying M30s. That an M30 in a firefight draws a lot of fire, you know, as opposed to an M16. And we guard duty one night, and there was 3 of us in this particular bunker. And of the 3, in every bunker, you had 3 guys, and one of them drew an M30. You know, everybody else had M16s, or the other 2 had M16, M30. And this guy, you know, he was new in country, you could tell. He plops it down, you know, sits up there, puts a belt in, you know, anchors it, and puts a round in. And I looked at the other guy, and he looked at me, and we just kind of walk over to the other side. Okay, you know, okay. We really don't, because other times, particularly what we did, whoever had it, would put it down, set it up, and just lay the belt over it. I mean, but he chained it around. Okay, you know, so deal with this, you know, and really, as far as guard duty was, is that the sergeant of the guard would come around every so often, and we would fire M79 rounds out. You know, just harassment, if there was anything out there to harass, you know, on that type of thing. As far as guard duty, you know, I enjoyed the daytime in the towers. We had towers all the way around. They had day guards in there, and it was interesting. You know, you could watch the airplanes come in, C-141s, one after the other, flying in. Lots of every once in a while you'd see a 707 or a DCA coming in with troops or leaving with troops, you know, going home or, you know, whatever. Freedom birds, you know, but mostly it was military aircraft. Lots and lots of fighters, F-100s for the most part, A-37s, little, you know, I tell you what, they sat so low to the ground, it was amazing. A-37s, C-130s, C-123s, and I can't remember the little one, I can't remember what it was. It had the high tail, 2 engines. Wasn't very big.
That's C-123?
No, C-123, you know, had a fuselage close to the size of it was just shorter of a C-130. But this was the C-123, but this was
Caribou.
Caribou, yeah, but I can't remember the designation. C7? C9? I can't, you know. Caribou, lots of them. Every once in a while, we would get, I always got a kick out of this because you could always tell before you saw it, an F4 would be a Phantom, F4 Phantom, because they made a lot of noise when they landed. You know, I don't know, I didn't understand it, but it just made a lot of noise when they landed. You know, the F-100s, you know, made noise when they took off and everything, but not so much when they landed. But,
what was your average day?
well, my average day was to go in and, you know, we'd process troops.
At what time would you get up?
Typically, it was around 7 o'clock.
What kind of shower point did you have?
Pardon?
What kind of shower point did you have?
Oh, it was, and usually I took my showers in the evening, but when we were in the Quonset hut, we moved to a barracks later on that was down the road. But in the Quonset hut, they had running water, you know, but most of the time the toilets were stopped up. We also had the buildings, latrines, you know. Yeah, first time I ever walked in one of those, you know, typically four seats there with toilet seats on, you know. but it was just like an outhouse, a four-seater outhouse. But the running water for showers. Now, it was also interesting too, because I hadn't been there very long, and it was late one night, and I was taking a shower. Maybe it was early in the morning. And I'm taking a shower, and I'm taking a shower, and because what happened was when I got in there, I got assigned to, we processed records at night, and me and another guy. So we worked at night. So I'm there in the morning, we gotten off work, and I'm showering, and it's like a gym shower. You had, on one side, you had this whole thing down here, and you had a wall with the shower heads, and they had shower heads on the other side, maybe 6 shower heads on this side, 6 shower heads, and I'm taking a shower. Hooch maid walks by. And I kind of turn, and she ignores me. She just walks, and that was the way it was. And I always wondered about that, and I talked to some guys about it too, but nobody could ever tell me what the thought was. But people would be in there showering all the time. The hooch maids would be in there cleaning up. You know, I mean, young ladies. And I never got used to that. Now, when we moved, one of the things too is we didn't have hot water. You know, it was cold water. And then when we moved down to barracks, they had a different building. The building was for showers. It was a shower building, but it had screen from waist high up, all the way around it. You know, so anybody walking by could look in and see anybody showering. But again, no hot water. It was cold water. Every shower I took in Vietnam was a cold shower. Yeah, and I got used to it.
What about your meals?
Meals, okay, we had a mess hall right down the street from the building that I worked in. The meals were they weren't too bad. A lot of times you go in there and you may have to do something on the outside to help out the guys, but they weren't too bad on that.
You pull KP.
Excuse me. None of us did. It was people who that was their job. They were assigned to KP. Nobody that I knew of the whole time I was there, pulled KP that wasn't already part of the kitchen or the food processing people. They were food processing. We never pulled KP. And like we were, like in basic, we'd pull KP, whatever the rotation was. There were several times when I pulled KP. One time in basic, I was what they called, the guy said, here you are, what was the term they used? You are the kitchen man. And I said, okay, kitchen man, what does that do? What does the kitchen man do? The guy, the cook, I don't know how many stripes he had on his shoulder, but because he was wearing a t-shirt. And he said, you do anything that's asked of you. You had other people who were assigned to specific things, serving, washing dishes, everything, but the kitchen man did anything and everything.
Yeah.
He was the go-to guy to help, mopping the floors, cleaning dishes, whatever needed to be done. And if it couldn't be done by somebody else, then the kitchen man did it. And that was interesting because you got to do a lot of stuff. I got to learn a lot about how a military kitchen.
Have Benoit have any more of the rocket attacks while you were there?
Oh yes.
What do you do?
Oh yes. Typically, you're supposed to, because they had trenches, they had places for you to go to. They didn't have any kind of, any kind of reinforced places to run into, concrete or whatever. They were just bunkers, outside. You'd run out there. What happened most of the time, and this was really kind of interesting to me, is people would run out of either the Quonset huts or the barracks. After we moved to the barracks, they would just run out and look. Look around, see what's going on. I remember one night I was because we worked at nights, and we'd finished our job, and the other guy who was working with me had gone back. We'd finished early, it was in the middle of the night. And I think I was probably sitting there writing letters. It was a big metal building that we were in. Right outside was a latrine, and across the street were Quonset huts. it was where the people came who were going on R&R, where they stayed. Now there, and then just down the street, maybe a couple hundred yards, was a communications unit. Had all their stuff set up in a big area, you know, I don't know, about big as a football field or bigger, you know, they had set up. And sitting there one night, and all of a sudden, explosion. You know, didn't hear anything, no warning, explosion. And it was just, you know, kind of down the street, you know. And I look, and I heard it's like something hit the roof, like somebody had thrown a rock. It was a metal roof, hit the roof. And another explosion. You know, it seemed like it was closer. And I'm on the floor then. You know, I always said I put a depression in that floor, it so hard. And then another one. So I got up and I went out and back around and out the front door of this building. And they had, on the side of the road, they had drainage ditches. So I'm out in it. Well, across the street is where all the barracks are with all these guys that are going R&R. They're standing out watching. Yeah. And one of them hollers at, we had barbed wire fence around. There was a gate, you know, you could get in and out, you know, but they had barbed wire fence around the whole thing. And the guy called me, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." You know, I'm sitting there laying, and there were still more explosions just down. Well, what had happened, found out the next day, more explosions, and down at this communications place, one of the communications company, it wasn't part of the First Cav, but they had gotten 2 or 3 rounds in there, you know, and actually, I can't remember exactly, but I think there were 2 or 3 guys killed. Well, found out the next day that it was friendly fire. There was an artillery unit on the other side of the air base from where we were, and what they did was, and we could hear them too, you know, but they always went and they did, you know, their routine, you know, they shot, here's where they shot, every place, you know, their coordinates, every night, you know, same place, just harassment, you know. But they gotten something wrong and put rounds just down the street from where I was, or where the building was, and in that communications unit, and actually killed several guys, you know, with friendly fire. But then we got, every once in a while, we get mortar attacks, or rocket attacks, you know, just, you know, nobody could ever explain to me, but, you know, I probably didn't ask all that much, you know, why? But harassment fire. Now, April the 12th, 1969. On April the 12th, 1969,
Now, you got in country July 17th,
July 17th, 1969 is when I came.
April 12th.
No, I'm sorry, August the 12th.
August
the 12th, 1969, I'm sorry. August the 12th, 1969, somebody made the decision that they were going to change the military pay certificates, or military pay currency, or the MPCs. You know, I got a kick out of that when I first got over there, because I had a piece of paper that was worth a nickel, a piece of paper that was worth a dime and a quarter, 50 cents, you know, when I got paid. You know, way I got paid is all my money was sent home except $50 a month, and I got $50, and it was in MPC. You know, and I go down over to the PX, or the BX at the base, or the PX there in Benoit. And but I got a kick out of doing paper money, monopoly money, you know, that's what they call it, monopoly money. Anyway, I found out later that they'd done this already several times during the Vietnam thing, but on August the 12th, they made that change. And they grabbed a bunch of us to go out and exchange monies. And they said that, you know, you got to be careful, because what they're doing, you're going to change dollar for dollar, you know. And I think they even had a limit, you know, that somebody couldn't change more than, I don't know, you know, $200-300. I can't remember for sure, but you had to exchange it in that day. After that day, whatever they owed didn't work, you know. And it was always a surprise, because you know, the Viet Cong did not like it. And somebody's tried to explain to me before. In fact, I saw a news story about it not too long ago on 60 Minutes, or I don't know what it was, about how it impacted the Viet Cong. Because we didn't get greenbacks, but it did. Whenever that military pay currency, it went right to the Viet Cong's pocket. And they would explain that to us, and that's why it was a top secret until it happened. And then you go out there and you had to do it all within a certain time period. And you had to do it with everybody, no matter where they were, each unit. And so you had to go out to every First Cav unit, wherever they were, and change money with them. And Charlie did not like that. And because we were finance, we got rocketed for several days in a row. Fortunately, nobody got hurt really bad, but it was very harassing. The unfortunate guys were those that went out to exchange money, because not only did they have to go through, stuff that was going on wherever they had to go, but then again you had the Viet Cong, Charlie, not happy with that exchange and having attacks, attacks. We had one guy came in, he came in from the field after this, had a bag of money, and it was, covered in blood, because the pay officer for the unit that they were trading, had collected all the money from his unit and had been killed, taking it to where he was meet to get it exchanged. And somebody who was with him picked it up, took it, but the pay officer himself had gotten killed, and his blood was all over the money. Different things, all kinds of different stories like that. But like I said, we were rocketed in went on mortar attacks for several days, and it was because of that exchange. And then going out there, all of a sudden, tap you on the shoulder, okay, be at such and such place, up at the armory, get your M16, and then you go jump on a Huey, or you jump on some type of four-wheel vehicle, a Jeep or Deuce and a half or whatever, and you're going out and you're going to exchange money, and you're exchanging money, you're trying to count, and looking over your shoulder, any little noise, whether it sounds like a gunshot or not, because that they're hunting for you, and you're out there in the situation where they're going to take umbrage at the fact that you're, quote unquote, stealing money from them. And and again, it was not until after I got back, I asked several questions, not until after I got back, before they could really explain how all that worked. Now, I've forgotten most of it, but how, this play money,
Yes.
how changing it, because they would be caught with a lot of that black market, and for the black market, which ended up as greenbacks back to the Viet Cong or the NVA, and they just didn't like you messing with their money, even though it wasn't their money, because of the black market.
We had scuttlebutt. If you had greenbacks sent over from home, you could get 7 for 1. Because the VC really wanted greenbacks, but they could use those.
Right. Oh yeah. And eventually, that's where it all.
And if you were caught with greenbacks.
Oh yeah. If you caught the greenbacks.
Yeah.
You didn't get to go home.
Yes. Did you have any contact with the locals around Benoit?
A little bit, because we had people who worked in the area from Benoit City. Benoit City was a little bitty village. I understand it's a big city now. A little bitty village that was right at the end of the runway of Benoit Airport, Benoit Air Base. And it was just a little village, but a lot of those people worked in Benoit Army Base. Doing different things, lots of different things. I want to call it yard work, but it really wasn't yard work. It was something like that. But hooch mates, they worked in cleaning barracks, cleaning hooches, different things, and I think even in food preparation, there were a lot of them. We had several ladies that worked, and I can't remember any of their names. I tried to learn some of their names, but had a hard time remembering, a hard time pronouncing them. And but you know, they were always there. You know, they were always there, and they, you know, and I thought, you know, very humbling because they learned more English than I learned Vietnamese, and for most of the guys too, they knew more English, even though they didn't know a lot, than most guys knew Vietnamese. You know, then you had the little thing, chop chop, number 10, number 1, you know, it's English, you know, but that's what, you know, and it was amazing. But I remember because there were always dogs. You know, we had dogs that, you know, always. We had this one dog who about every 6 months had a litter of puppies. You know, I mean, just like clockwork.
Yes.
You know, because of all the dogs, and you know, she was female, so she had a litter of puppies about every 6 months. And we had these little puppies one time, and trying to give them away to guys, you know, whatever, because it was this dog was in our unit all the time, and she had these little puppies, and we were giving them away. Had one left, and we asked this one of the young girls that worked there one time if she wanted the dog. She said sure, so took it away, and it was great. I remember, and then I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks later, you know, saw her again. We'd seen her and everything, but I just hadn't think about it. I said, you know, asked her, well, how's the puppy? You know, that we gave you. She said, oh, very good. Sweet. Oh.
Yes.
And it was them. And then I learned too that dog was good.
Yes.
Cat was a delicacy. I saw one cat the whole time I was in Vietnam. You know, but somebody told me that you know, if they really like dog meat, they really loved cat meat. And so that's why you didn't see as many cats.
Yeah.
You know, because of that. And then when I got home, I remember in Midland used to be a vendor on the street in one of the shopping villages, selling hot dogs, you know, stuff like that, and or tacos and things like that. But I used to think, okay, you know, where did that meat come from? Never thought about it before, you know, before Vietnam.
What's your most vivid memory of Vietnam?
Oh golly, most vivid memory. Well, I've got some memories that I don't like, but vivid would be that's a hard one because I remember so much about it, and there's a lot of it I don't want to remember. I would say, you know, one of the things is that first few days I was there when they had that rocket attack and it hit the ammo on the air base. You know, because it just blew up in flames everywhere, and that was really vivid. I mean, there's a lot of other things, you know. You know, one thing I remember one day there, used to watch planes take off and land, heard a noise. It sounded like a plane, but something different. And I look up, and I finally found it. It was U-2 landing, because Benoit had the longest runway in Vietnam, in South Vietnam. And it just amazed me. So big, it was U-2, and it came in and it landed, and you watch it land, and they had a El Camino that was at the end of the runway. Now I put this together on watching at 2 different times. I saw U-2s land there, but the El Camino at the end of the runway, and it would start up before the plane got to the end of the runway, and the plane would pass it, but then the El Camino would catch up with it, and the wing would come down on top of the El Camino because the landing gear was in the middle of the fuselage. And they whenever they landed at other bases or whatever, used to anyway, they had some mechanism, I don't know how they did it, for wheels, very small wheels that came out of the end of the wings to keep the wings from touching the ground. But in Benoit, and it was just a stopover to refuel, that type of thing. But that was pretty vivid to me, was seeing a U-2 landing there.
What's your favorite memory of Vietnam?
Going home.
Yeah.
Getting my orders, to report to wherever I needed to report to go home. But also I remember getting my orders to go to Saigon to fly out, going on R&R to Hawaii to meet my wife. That meant a lot to me, because I was going to go see her. And that was, I think a tremendous feeling.
How long were you in Vietnam?
I was there for 412 days, 13 and a half months.
Why 13 and a half months?
Because I had to extend for 45 days, roughly, to get in under the 5-month thing when I came back from Vietnam, when I was fine, so I could get out at the time I came back. So I ended up serving 19 months of my 2 years that I was drafted for. But it was because I went through the process. As I told you earlier, my wife and I, a lot of prayer, one of the things too about Vietnam is that I've been a Christian since I was 10 years old. That my wife and I talked about it and knew that God was going to get us through there. I still have some pain about the fact that there's 58,300 plus guys and gals that did not come home alive. And I've always asked, why me? Why did I get to come home and those people did not? I guess, and I'm sorry, I've kind of evaded your question here. I remember those things. I remember that. I remember coming home. I remember spending a week with my wife in Honolulu and on the island of Oahu. But I also remember the process that we went through before I went, and doing our best to give it all to God. And then while I was there, both of us, while I was there, she was in Texas, I was there doing that, but still every so often, and it's kind of interesting because more so now than it did, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. It comes back to me. It says, why did I make it? And I know God knows there was a reason. God had a reason. But, I always think to myself, why did those 58,000 plus not come home?
Another question you'll have to answer. What's your worst memory of Vietnam?
Oh. I guess it had to be that what I was telling you about. Well, there was some, looking over your shoulder, trying to take care of business and being aware that you're in an area where not only could somebody look at you and think bad thoughts about you, but they could kill you. The night that friendly fire, it scared me, but being out and about, for a couple of times out and about, out of the, out from the base, carrying a rifle. One of the things that obviously they did is, taught me how to fire an M16. Carrying that, and then with the thoughts in the back of my head too. You have to understand. This is one of the things that my family has always looked at me kind of askance, is because of my sense of humor. They say I have a weird sense of humor, but thinking about doing that and thinking about what I had read about M16s, early on, having problems jamming, and I'm carrying an M16. One of the things they taught us in basic is, even with an M14 or an M16, is you don't put 20 rounds in your clip. You put 18 rounds in that thing because it has a tendency. I don't know what the odds of that tendency is. A tendency to jam if you fill the clip to the brim, the 20 rounds, you know. And like I was telling you a while ago, you know, you go out in the countryside for whatever reason, you want to carry as much ammunition as you possibly can.
Now, did you carry a weapon when you went out?
Right.
The M16?
M16.
How many rounds did you carry?
I tried to get as many clips as I could, 18-round clips, because we didn't put 20 in. 18, I couldn't tell you, maybe, you know, bags and everything in my pockets, you know, side pockets and everything. Maybe 20 clips.
Now, who provided security for all this money you're carrying?
It was just other GIs, you know, they were providing security, you know, from local units,
Yeah.
you know, whoever they use. And when you get out there where you're going, you know, the security is being provided by that unit, you know. In a lot of cases, it was you know, staff sergeants or better, or even officers. You know, I don't remember ever seeing anything above a captain, but, you know, providing security. You know, but at the same time, you know, you're carrying, you know, I'm carrying an M16. You know, I always say, hey, can I have a pistol? Nobody ever gave me one. You know,
Did you process people the whole time you were there, in and out? Was that your job?
most of the time, yes. You know, for the bulk of the time. You know, there was some times where I did some other things that were just, you know, kind of off the cuff with the admin unit and with other units in around other CAV units.
Such as, what would you do with the other cabinets?
Typically, you know, help out with financial stuff. You know, helping people out with financial stuff. You know, trying to teach, especially new people, not necessarily the processing, you know, what they can do financially. You know, there wasn't a whole lot, you know, especially if you're talking, you know, to E3s, E4s. You know, there's not a whole lot that they can do, but helping with that. And then I went to the air base a couple of times with a church group, you know, with a group that we actually worshipped over there at the air base, but we did some volunteer work.
What about USO shows?
USO shows were kind of interesting. First USO show I saw, I couldn't tell you who, you know, the people were doing the singing. You know, I never heard of them. It was just, you know, somebody, and it was kind of interesting. You know, they had a lot of United States, you know, American songs. You know, had a stripper in that first one, but you know, that was kind of interesting. I did in December 1969. I did get a chance. I should have thought this and wrote it out. I did get a chance to see Bob Hope. That year with him, he had, you know, all the good-looking women and everything, but he also had Neil Armstrong. 3 days after I landed in Vietnam, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. You know, and I remember standing there saying, looking up at night, you know, while they were on the moon, thinking, how in the world can we put somebody on the moon and we're at war? You know, I thought of that question. Because 3 days, you know, every year when we celebrate the landing on the moon on the 20th of July, you know, if I haven't already thought about it, I think about the fact that that was my 3rd day in country, you know, when that happened. But went to see Bob Hope at Cu Chi, which was down the road. And I thought it was kind of interesting because, you know, later on he was at Long Bend. But not everybody could go to the Long Bend show. So a bunch of us, you know, I can't remember if we volunteered or got volunteered, to go to the show at Cu Chi. We had to go with buses. You know, and it was, you know, Benoit to Long Bend was a very short distance, and most of it was military. Benoit to Cu Chi was a little further, and none of it was military. You had Cu Chi, you had a camp at Cu Chi, and you had Camp Benoit, but everything else was wide open spaces. And we went down there, we were going to ride buses, and they issued everybody an M16. I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting, you know. But got to go to there, and you know, huge expanse. We were sitting way back, you know. And I got a kick out of it, and because you could, you know, they had stage up there, and you could see Bob Hope, and you know, and listen to him. You could hear really well, you know, but it's so far off. But I got a kick out of the fact that Neil Armstrong, you know, Armstrong was there. He interviewed him, you know, asked him about being on the moon and things like that. And then you had, and I can't remember, you know, it probably took me a while. I can remember some of the women he had and some of the people he sang. But I enjoyed that. And then they had various USO shows come through who were, you know, different. The New Christie Minstrels, I think, was one of them that I saw. You know, different groups on the USO shows. And the Bob Hope is the only one that I did not see right in and around Benoit Army Base or Benoit Air Base. You know, everything else everything else was there except for the Bob Hope show. He wasn't there.
Tell me about coming home.
Coming home, it was interesting because I got my orders. I knew they're coming. You know, counting the days. Had my little sheet, like everybody else did, with numbers. When I got to 100 days, you know, listed 199, 98, and I started marking through it. You know, getting down there, and then you know, I had to say goodbye. You know, and I thought, golly, how you do this? I'm not going to see these guys ever again, most likely. You know, and you know, saying goodbye to them, and then you know. Getting rid of stuff. I didn't want to carry a whole lot home. You know, getting rid of stuff, you know, things like that. Got all my stuff that was issued me and everything coming home. And then saying goodbye, and then, you know, getting on a bus and heading down to Benoit Air Base. You know, we didn't go through Long Bend going home. Went down to Benoit Air Base. And one of the things I did while I was there, I bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder from a guy who was going home, who had bought it from a guy who was going home, you know, months before. But I made the decision to take it back. So I boxed it up and shipped it back, you know. I can't remember how much it cost me or anything, because I wanted to keep it, you know. I've got several pictures of me sitting there listening to it in Vietnam and back home. But I wanted to keep it, and that was a task. I had to go to Benoit Air Base, and I had to go and I had to get with whoever in order to ship that back home. And that's why nobody else wanted to ship it home. They didn't want to go through the hassle. I didn't think about it. But getting on the plane and sitting on it, you know, and I'm sitting there thinking about, you know, one of the thoughts a lot of people talked about is these planes taking off and landing, and you've got Viet Cong everywhere, you know. And nothing had happened while the whole time I've been there. But thinking about, you know, possibility that, you know, somebody's going to do it. And remember one night on guard duty that I think it was an F-100 took off. And because of the wind, it took off over Benoit Village. And of course, you know, we had, you know, if I remember correctly, it was every 5th round a tracer, red tracer, you know. VC or the NVA issued their thing, their tracers were green. And this F-100 took over Benoit City. We were watching, I always liked airplanes. We're watching it, and there's this green tracer following it up. Okay. And I thought about that, you know, taking off. Okay, what if this is the first one they shoot at? You know, thought about that, you know. They always talk about the last few days, last several days, you get really, really jumpy. Making sense, but I understood it. You know, you get jumpy because you're going home, and you don't want anything to get in your way of going home.
When you came home, where'd you land?
Came home, landed at San Francisco International. Got on a bus, it took you to Oakland Army Base. Did all the processing. I can't remember, I think it was maybe mid or late afternoon when I landed, but processed all night. Went through Oakland Army Base, processing, going through everything, you know, taking all the stuff that I brought back and whatever, issuing uniform, you know, making sure you had all the ribbons right. They were doing this, you know, everything, and rank and everything like that, all that stuff right. And then going back to San Francisco International. where I got on a plane, and one of the things I was concerned about is other people. You know, what are they going to, because of everything that was happening in the U.S. at that time, even before and since, you know, after that, about people not being very friendly toward Vietnam vets. One of the proudest things is a yellow patch on my right sleeve. Knowing that most people didn't realize what it meant on the right side.
Yes.
But I knew what it meant.
Yes.
And that, I think I pointed that out to several family members.
When did you get your discharge?
It was in September the 3rd, 1970.
September 3rd, 1970.
September 3rd, 1970.
You go back to Midland?
Flew out of San Francisco to Dallas Love Field. And because of the timing, I got in there late at night, one night, but there was not a flight back to Midland. My flight to Midland didn't leave until the next morning. So I got to walk around Love Field, just like I got to walk around Lax. Going, I got to walk around Love Field. And that concerned me too, because I'm in uniform, and there's still a lot of people around Love Field. And I don't know why, you know, concerned about, you know, somebody's going to jump all over me. But, you know, nothing happened. Got on a plane, early morning flight. You know, I called, let my wife know, early morning flight. And this, again, before they had the little things that come out to the airplane. You had to get off the airplane and walk on the ground. And I remember the airplane landed at Midland and made a circle and pulled up to the gate. And there standing at the gate were two people. My brother and my wife. Excuse me. Can't think about these things without getting emotional. But they were standing at the gate. There were only two people. It was like 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. So get down, go down the hill, and, you know, hug and everything like that. And it was great. And then my little brother, who was still in high school at the time, he was a senior, but we drove from there to where he was working, and he jumped down out of the warehouse where he was working, you know, hugged me big time. My little brother's always been bigger than me, and but what stands out the most is looking out that window and seeing my brother and my wife standing up waiting on me.
But you joined the Army again.
Probably.
I like to do word association. When you hear boot camp, basic training. What do you
Basic
think?
training.
Yes.
I think about, I guess one of the things I think about is bayonet training for some reason. I didn't do too well in it, but I think about that, you know, because it's yelling, I guess. You know, when I think about boot camp, and then marching. Benoit. I think about the Army base there right next to the air base, and being able to look at both of them from one of the guard towers.
Mortars and rockets.
Mortars and rockets. Find the lowest place I can in the ground. You know, when I hear mortars and rockets going off.
Army finance.
Army finance. Well, that's kind of interesting. It's because of the way they did things then. I don't know how they're doing it now. It was interesting the way they did things, because my major in college was business administration with concentration in accounting, and I could not find a common denominator, you know, between Army finance and accounting principles. And I'm sure it was there. It was just not the way it was carried out on a day-to-day basis.
Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson. Oh, it's kind of interesting with him because, you know, he wasn't the president that drafted me. It was Nixon. Right. You know, who actually drafted me.
Well, he's next.
Oh, he's next, you know, and I think about that, you know, he drafted me, you know, Johnson, lots of stuff with going on in and out about the development of the war and how it grew under him, and then Nixon, I always think about that phrase on the letter I got, my draft letter, greetings from the president, okay, it was Nixon. Vietnam. I try to think about it being a country today that's trying to, that it's still more or less communistic, but, it's a whole different place. I try to think about that, but I have a hard time thinking of it other than my experience. I hear about it, I hear about it now that, they're getting between them and China, there's a little conflict between them and China. Whenever I meet somebody from Vietnam, and whenever I see Vietnam written about or talked about on TV or something, I flashback.
How do you want to be remembered?
How do I want to be remembered? I want to be remembered by my sons and my daughters-in-law and my grandchildren as a godly man, as somebody that they look up to because they like me, love me. I told you earlier about the fact that I've spent 4 years in federal prison, and that was because I was leaning on my own understanding, which the Bible tells us specifically not to, and trying to take care of things myself instead of letting God do it. I like to think I've been a Christian most of my life since I was 10 years old. And I hope that I want my family to remember that, and not the fact that I spent 4 years in federal prison.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Well, I hope so. I hope it goes well. I hope you like it and everything works good. Not a lot of fire and brimstone.
Oh, but fire and brimstone isn't everything.
No, it's not.
Well, again, this is August 25th, 2016. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview at Rocky Crawford of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. We have 1 minute left.
1 minute left. That's great. In Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Now, I spent the last several years before prison in Plano, Texas. Now, Plano's a great place to live. And that's where most of my family still is. I do have a son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren in Broken Arrow, so that's good. They're close by.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate it.
You bet. I'm glad I could help. I'm glad to do this.